The city of Orario found itself on the precipice of a calm before the storm. Many adventurers and many familiars were left on the sidelines, waiting to see what was going to happen next. So far, there was only rumor, a powerful monster escaping, danger on the dungeon floors. So much so that the guild had ordered for an immediate evacuation, postponing any further adventuring and pulling out as many adventurers as they could. The gods were set to have an emergency Dionysus, a special meeting of the gods. Normally, they held one every year, and a few special meetings when the situation required it. This was such an occasion. All gods, great and minor, were being called. No expense was being made. Once they were all gathered together, the situation was laid bare. A destroyer. A destroyer that had been sealed away in the dungeon was now on the prowl, and worse, it was going to be making its way up to the surface, and it would arrive into the city. Of course, many of the gods dismissed this very idea. A destroyer? Those metal monstrosities? They were all defeated in the Great War over 500 years ago. There's no way there'd be any left. However, Hercules would be the first one to vouch against that notion. If you all believe that the destroyers are no more, then you are quite foolish. Ah yes, the muscle-bound brute. Of course he chooses to speak of the occasion. You'd wish for a destroyer to arrive to get in your fix. Do I look to be in a gaming mood? Hercules yelled. I could live 1,000 lifetimes and wish that I never have to see another one of those bloody bastard metal bolts ever again. But the facts are the facts. The destroyers are arisen. They have returned, and one seeks its way to the surface. This arcane, this stupid rule! Gods not being allowed to enter the dungeon. What is the meaning of this foolishness? If you allow that destroyer to come to the surface, everything will be lost. And what exactly do you suggest, Lord Hercules? That we go against the sacred creed? Gods are not permitted to enter into the dungeon under no circumstance. Not even a circumstance such as this. Do any of you care for your familiars? They will all be destroyed and there will be nothing left. The gods found themselves in an uproar, not sure of what to do in this situation. No circumstance had ever permitted for the gods to go into the dungeon. It was against the law, a law and code that even the most lenient of gods had to understand. And for the few that did sneak in time and time again, it was the ultimate taboo. If sneaking in was bad enough, a god using their powers inside of the dungeon was out of the question. It was beyond. No one would even dare to speak it. Hell, the reason why Hercules had to suffer through his 12 labors was because he made that error, and Thor had to be the one to pull him out. Of course, there were few that knew the actual truth, those who were keenly aware of why Hercules went into that dungeon in the first place. But still, what could they do now? Hercules was just in a heaping fury. All of these arcane rules and laws that they abided by, it always resulted in people getting killed and people dying. His familia paid the price for that. And yet, even now, no one was willing to budge on this. Of course, for Hestia, she was worried. Her familia was still in there. Belle, Welf, Lily, all of them, along with other members and familia party members who had agreed to help. What was supposed to be a simple exploration had now taken a disastrous turn for the worse. Hestia had formed a group of her own with some of the other gods, among them being Lord Takamichizuki, or Lord Zuchi for short, Micah, Loki, Hermes, Hephaestus, and now Hercules. This group of gods had formed a bit of a coalition of their own. Even among the other gods, it was a little perplexing to see so many being on the same page of any given matter. Every god always looked out for their own best interests, for their own satisfaction of their own familia and purposes. But still, Hestia had been rather different. Often considered the mascot or the weakest of the gods, and yet she had powerful gods and goddesses on her side. Although more people attribute that to Bel than anything else. He was the linchpin in all of this, the big ire in the room that couldn't be overlooked. Don't get me wrong, under normal circumstances, it wasn't uncommon for gods to intermingle from time to time, to form alliances, even against other familias. But what Hestia had going on was something that even had Freya curious. All of these well-renowned gods all working along with her. All of them having this weird intermingling of conscious and idea. It wasn't something that happened often. Sure, you might have a god or two or three, but when you start having 4, 5, or 6 all gathered together, that had people looking at things rather differently. And then there was Hercules, the one god here who didn't have a familia and who was on, in a weird way of saying, probation. Of course, there was another matter that came. Another goddess would arrive, one that hadn't been seen here in almost 100 years. She typically didn't come to the meeting of the gods, but she chose to make an exception. A woman whose skin was kissed by the sun itself, an ebony beauty for all to see, adorned in cloth of fine black, a black darker than even that of a crow's feather, gold that shimmered and adorned her body, rubies, sapphires that illuminated and radiated off of the light of the sun. This was the goddess of the panther, the goddess known as Bast. Bast was someone who commanded attention when she entered into the room. Even Freya, stopping from her own conversation to acknowledge her presence. The goddess Bast did not reside in Orario, although her familia did come to the city from time to time. No, she lived far in the east, in the desert lands, where she had built a city for herself. It wasn't uncommon for gods to make the travel to visit and see her, but it was rare for goddess Bast to arrive to the country of Orario and to arrive to the summit of the gods. If things were dire now, then this was far beyond the tip of any iceberg. No, things had plunged far deeper than anyone could imagine. Goddess Bast, Freya would say with a smile. Do forgive, but it's quite a rarity for you to arrive to one of our Dionysus. Goddess Freya, may you live long and prosper. I felt something, a great force, one that I have not felt since the days of the bygone era. I thought that I could ignore it, but seeing all of my fellow gods and goddesses gathered here, I felt that it would only be fitting that I make my presence known. Bast would be brought up to speed on the situation. It affected even her as well. She remembered the time of the last Great War, remembering when her familia fought alongside the others, with the other gods and goddesses in the battle against Gore the God Butcher. For Bast, she was the goddess of the panther, the Black Panther specifically. As god of the panthers and the one who chose the champion that represented said title, a title that was passed down through the clan of a family that took the last name of T'Challa. For many, they couldn't help but ask why Goddess Bast had chosen to arrive now. If it were just for the situation, then things must have truly have been dire. Of course, when dealing with the likes of a destroyer, one of the more powerful abominations created by Gore the God Butcher, thought to have been completely destroyed, but instead having been sealed into the lower depths of the dungeons in and of themselves, they all questioned what they should do. I have already sent a few from my familia into the dungeon to see to the matter, Bast would say. Ah, you've wasted no time indeed. Bast looked over to Hestia and smiled. Goddess Hestia, how have you been? Goddess Bast, Hestia would bow. My pleasure. It's been quite a while. Yes, it has indeed. I've heard much about you and your familia. Your power, it has only continued to grow. I see that good fortune has shined down upon you. So much so that even the god of thunder now dwells within your domain. His name, Cranel? I would much like to meet him. And I'd even like for him to hopefully spar with my champion someday. It's always an honor, Goddess Bast, for you to consider anyone from my familia worthy enough to battle against the Black Panther. But the situation has grown far beyond any friendly rivalry. I am aware. Hercules, Bast would say. Goddess Bast, as I live and breathe. The situation in the dungeon of yours with the Destroyer, have you made any progress in dealing with it? Unfortunately, Hercules would say, it has been far more difficult than either of us would like to admit. You see, because of our rather arcane rules and beliefs, we gods cannot enter into the dungeon to deal with the Destroyer. We must wait until it reaches the surface. That seems rather hasty, don't you think? Bast looked to everyone. These are our rules, Freya would say. These are the laws that were put in place from the very beginning when we descended from the heavens. These laws cannot be changed, even for us gods. That might very well be, but you understand the risk. Your city, potentially the world. If just one destroyer is able to rise. Many gods shuddered at the thought. You see, for all the gods that were gathered here, there were many more who had long since passed. Many gods whose names were lost to the sands of time. Gore was not called a god butcher for no reason. No, there were many gods whose lives, whose very existence, were cut short at the end of the ebony blade that he possessed. The monsters that he created that once roamed the earth. They were dangerous not just to humans, not just to familias, but even to the gods themselves. and thus now they found themselves facing that precipice. One destroyer, they might be able to beat it, but how many would die in the process? Destruction would be unavoidable. And who were to tell if there weren't more that could soon follow? The situation grew dire by the moment. Eventually, decisions would have to be made, tough ones at that. We have decided that there will be an evacuation of the dungeon. From our calculations, it will take 6 days' time before the destroyer reaches the surface. And how long will it take for the dungeon to be cleared? Bast asked. Most familiars have not gone any lower than the 25th floor. We should be able to get everyone out within 4 days. Afterwards, we will all pull forth our efforts into forming a barrier that will guard against the dungeon and keep the destroyer from escaping. If necessary, we will begin the evacuation of the city, and should the destroyer make its way to the surface, we will deal with it from there. If you are here, can we take it that we will have your support as well? But of course, Bast would say. I wish to support my brothers and sisters in a time of need. Of course, as the evacuation were continuing, Hestia hadn't heard any news from her familia yet, and even more so for Micah and for Zuchi and the others who had sent fellow members of their familia to accompany Hestia's. Hermes would meet with the group of gods once more to see what their next steps could be. Well, I don't have to tell any of you all that it seems that we've all gone to pot, Hermes said. Osphie would poke her god in the shoulder. Lord Hermes, now is not the time to be so dire. I'm not. But still, things aren't looking too good. We need to think of the next course of action. Well, the dungeon's being evacuated, and we've got 4 days' time to pull all of our familia members out of there before things get dicey. You haven't heard anything from Belle or the others, have you? Hermes asked Hestia. I haven't, and that's why I'm worried. Who knows what could have happened to them? What if they've run into the destroyer? I just feel so uneasy. We should have faith in our children, Lord Zuchi said. They've been able to pull themselves from worser situation. They're not the type that would shrink back in fear. They'll stick together and they'll find a way out. But still, there's nothing that we can do, though, Micah would say. Nothing we can do for now except wait. We can't go in there ourselves. Security is being kept tight around the dungeon, and the city's evacuation has already gotten underway. Surprisingly, they've been able to move pretty fast. Everything should be cleared out in no time. Yes, but I fear that will not even be enough, Hermes would say. Hercules, just how bad was the destroyer that you and Thor fought back then? He's a terrible monster. A man made of metal, who's able to breathe fire from the underworld. Back during the time of the Great War, the destroyers were killing gods left and right. There were but a handful of individuals capable of slaughtering the destroyers on an even playing field. Me and Thor alone were able to take out a good deal of them, but it's not easy. They're hard to destroy. Just taking out one takes good force and effort. Based on our battle strength right now, how many do you think we'd lose taking out this one destroyer? I'd say on an estimation, 40% of your forces will be wiped out alone. That includes our brothers and sisters. It's that bad, huh? Even after the war, when we thought we had destroyed them all, it seemed like there were a few rats that didn't go down with the ship. How many do you think are left? The last time I was speaking to Thor, he estimated that there were 3 destroyers left remaining. And now there's one attempting to make its way to the surface. And where do you think the other 2 are? Do you think they could soon follow? There's no way of knowing. I was only aware of the one that me and Thor managed to beat back long enough to seal. We probably could have killed it, but our time in the dungeon was cut short. We couldn't stay any longer. I had to come back and face punishment, and Thor was the only one capable of riling back my anger. I see. I tried to buy you guys as much time as I could, but you had the council in uproar. You were already breaking the ancient law, outright defying it. If we had allowed you to persist any longer, the damage could have been irreversible. Hercules would scoff at that notion. If it came down to it, he would have fought until that destroyer was nothing but scrap. Damn what the law or what Thor or anyone else thought. But this was the compromise. It was then that Bast would make herself known. She had been watching how Hestia and this group of gods had been talking amongst themselves. And she wanted to see what was there to this Belle Cranel that she had heard so much about. From the few stories that had managed to reach her all in the East, she had learned that this Belle were many things. Strong, shrewd, cunning, but also kind, humble, and modest. Rare attributes to those of men with strength. When word had come around that a human child had somehow gained access to the power of Thor, safe to say there were many who had a keen interest. There were some who believed that this idea of a human using the power of Thor would be impossible. But there were others who were fearful. A potential human with the strength of a god who could potentially kill a god. That was something that couldn't be ignored either. In the end, though, as Bast had come to learn, Belle were none of the horrible things that people imagined. In fact, the boy was quite the opposite. It seemed as though he tried to avoid using power as much as possible. He truly had the making of a hero. I can tell that you are worried about him, Bast would say to Hestia. I've sent a few from my own familia to assist in the evacuation. If your familia is still stuck in there, then I assure you, on the lives of my past familia, on their ancestors, your familia, all of your children will return to you safely. Thank you, Lord Bast, Hestia would say. For now, we can only prepare, and we can only hope that the spirits will be kind. For I fear a great darkness will soon envelop us all. In the meantime, on the 25th floor, the rest of Belle's party found themselves in a fight for their life as they fought against the monster Rex. Finding themselves trapped with no way to escape, the group had no choice but to fight back against the monster, and only hope that Belle and Miss Ryu would be safe until they could reunite. Despite their best efforts, it seemed that all hope was lost, as even with their best strategy and putting their best foot forward, and for all the damage they had managed to do to the two-headed monster Rex, it still wasn't enough. Of course, There were worser ways to go out, but even for an adventurer, you always hope that this isn't how it ends, that somehow you find a way to pull off the impossible, and you hope that maybe, just maybe, you make it back home to the surface. That's one of the sacrifices every adventurer makes when they enter the dungeon. You never know when you look at the sun for the final time before you descend into the depths below, that might very well be the last time you ever see the sun again. But just as all hope seemed lost, a warrior's cry could be heard. 4 female soldiers, all of them with their heads shaven and with markings inscribed, would begin their assault as they carried their spears. They managed to corner the beast before a young man would make his presence known. A young man clad in black, with a mask that resembled that of a panther emerging forth. The boy sparked with lightning that formed all around him as he summoned a great lightning avatar panther that went forth into the waters with the monster and began biting into it, shocking and stunning the beast long enough and allowing for them to strike back at it once again. The others had no idea what was going on, who this young man was, who these people were, but all the same, they were grateful for the assistance. So, this is the famed 25th floor boss, the Monster Rex. Rather troublesome, but where I'm from, I have faced a lot worse than you, and you will fall all the same. They watched as the young man pulled 2 daggers from his side, moving with a swiftness that almost seemed to rival even Belle's. He was able to strike at the heart of the monster, channeling his lightning once more, reducing the beast to ash and sunder before it dissipated, leaving only its monster stone. He was easily a level 4 or higher, Welf would think. Lily couldn't help but ask, Who are you? Fear not, comrades. I am Azari T'Challa. I am the Black Panther and head of the Bast familia. We are here to help. In the meantime, Belle and Ryu found themselves struggling and fighting for their lives. They had descended further than they had ever thought, finding themselves on the 37th floor, the White Palace, with a beast known as the Juggernaut on their tail. They found themselves trapped in a corner of the dungeon with nowhere to escape, bloody, battered, beaten, and bruised. Belle attempted to summon whatever lightning he had left. He didn't even have the strength to call on Mjolnir to his side. He stood in front of Miss Ryu, steeling his resolve as he grabbed hold of his blade, the only weapon he had. He'd buy her as much time as he could, enough time to try to escape, to try to find a way. It was the best he could do. However, just as when all hope seemed lost, a cry of thunder could be heard, the beast turning around and being staggered by the attack, as a new fighter emerged. Well, that took long enough. Hey, Ugly, why don't you try picking a fight with someone that can hit back? Instead of dealing with the runts, come deal with a man. What the? Who is that? Belle thought. And more importantly, why was he holding Stormbreaker? The mysterious warrior readied himself as the juggernaut turned, its eyes glowing a dark, bloody red, its razor teeth jeering and ready to rip him apart. Beta Ray Bill was now on the scene, a warrior of the Xenos and conqueror of the dungeon. Looks like it's time to make a name for myself, Beta Ray Bill would say, as he lifted Stormbreaker and pointed directly towards the Juggernaut. I recently got a major upgrade, and I've been itching for a fight. Around these parts, I hear you're pretty tough. They call you the Juggernaut. The irresistible force coming face to face with the immovable object. And I wonder who's gonna win. There's no need to worry, because I already know the answer. It's gonna be me. Now come get wrecked, you ugly son of a bitch. This concludes Danmachi the Last King, What If Bel Cranel Was Thor, Season 4, Part 6. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that's come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we'll continue with What If Bel Cranel Was Thor, Season 4, Part 7. But that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.